Victoria Chun adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and smoothed down her modest gray blazer as she stood before the imposing brick facade of Riverside High School. The September morning carried the crisp promise of a new academic year, but beneath her composed exterior, her stomach churned with familiar butterflies. At 28, she had taught at 3 different schools, but starting over never got easier. What made this transition particularly challenging wasn't just the new environment, it was the secret she carried, one that had shaped her entire adult life, yet remained hidden behind her quiet, scholarly demeanor. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The truth was, Victoria Chun wasn't just another mild-mannered English teacher. Beneath her conservative cardigans and sensible flats lay 15 years of rigorous martial arts training, a black belt in Shotokan karate and reflexes honed through countless tournaments. But that life felt like a distant memory now, carefully tucked away behind lesson plans and literature discussions. She had made a conscious choice to leave that world behind, to embrace the peaceful sanctuary of education. Little did she know that Riverside High would test that resolution in ways she never imagined. Victoria's first day at Riverside High began like any other. She arrived 45 minutes before the first bell, her arms loaded with boxes of books and carefully laminated classroom decorations. The hallways echoed with the familiar sounds of a school preparing for students, janitors buffing floors, teachers chatting over coffee, and the distant hum of copy machines working overtime. Classroom, room 237, sat at the end of a long corridor in the English wing. The previous teacher had left it surprisingly bare, with only a few motivational posters curling at the edges and a forgotten coffee mug sitting on the windowsill. Victoria set down her boxes and surveyed the space that would become her domain. For the next year, possibly longer if things went well. "You must be our new English teacher," came a warm voice from the doorway. Victoria turned to see a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. "I'm Margaret Sullivan, the department head. Welcome to Riverside." "Victoria Chun," she replied, extending her hand. "Thank you for the warm welcome. I'm excited to be here." Margaret stepped into the room, her experienced eyes taking in the organized chaos of Victoria's unpacking. "I see you're one of those teachers who likes to get everything perfect before the students arrive. I appreciate that. We've had some challenges with classroom management in this particular room." "Challenges?" Victoria asked, pausing in her arrangement of desk supplies. "Oh, nothing you can't handle, I'm sure," Margaret said with a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The previous teacher, Mr. Garrett, left mid-semester. He was a bit overwhelmed by some of our more spirited students. But you seem like you have a good presence. I think you'll do just fine." Victoria nodded, filing away this information. Every school had its difficult students, and she had dealt with her share over the years. Her approach had always been to establish clear boundaries early while maintaining respect and fairness. It had served her well in the past. The morning progressed smoothly as Victoria continued setting up her classroom. She arranged desks in small groups to encourage collaboration, hung up carefully selected literary quotes around the room, and created a reading corner with a small bookshelf and comfortable chairs. By lunchtime, room 237 had been transformed from a sterile, abandoned space into a warm, inviting learning environment. "Impressive work," came a voice from the doorway. Victoria looked up to see a man in his early 30s wearing a polo shirt and khakis, with the slightly crumpled look of someone who coached after school. "I'm Dave Martinez, P Department. I heard we got a new English teacher." "Victoria Chun," she introduced herself, wiping dust from her hands. "Nice to meet you. Same here. Hey, I don't suppose you have any interest in coaching? We're always looking for teachers to help with extracurricular activities." Maybe a drama club or debate team, Victoria smiled. I appreciate the offer, but I like to focus on my classroom teaching, especially in my first year at a new school. Fair enough, Dave said. Well, if you ever change your mind, let me know. And if you need any advice about handling the tougher kids, I'm just down the hall. Some of these students can be real challenges, especially the ones who think they run the school. After Dave left, Victoria found herself wondering about these recurring references to difficult students. Every school had its share of troublemakers, but the faculty seemed particularly concerned about certain individuals. She decided to focus on her own preparation and deal with challenges as they arose. The afternoon brought her first glimpse of the student body as they began filtering in for various after-school activities. From her window, she could see groups of teenagers gathering in the parking lot, their conversations animated and their energy infectious. Most seemed like typical high school students' backpacks slung over shoulders, phones in hand, navigating the complex social dynamics of adolescence. One group caught her attention. Near the far end of the parking lot, a cluster of students stood apart from the others. Even from a distance, something about their posture and the way other students seemed to give them a wide berth suggested they held a different kind of influence in the school's social hierarchy. Victoria watched as a smaller student approached the group, only to be dismissed with what appeared to be harsh words and laughter. "Those are the Hendersons," came Margaret's voice behind her. Victoria hadn't heard the department head return. "The Hendersons?" Victoria asked, still watching the interaction below. "Jake and Tyler Henderson, brothers, seniors. Their father is Bill Henderson, owns Henderson Construction, biggest company in town. Builds half the commercial properties around here and employs a good chunk of the community. The family has significant influence." Victoria detected a careful tone in Margaret's voice, the kind used when discussing delicate political situations. "I see. They're not bad kids, necessarily," Margaret continued, though her expression suggested otherwise. "But they're used to getting their way. They've been at this school since kindergarten, and they've learned that their father's position in the community gives them certain privileges. And the previous teacher had problems with them," Margaret sighed. "Mr. Garrett tried to treat them like any other students. He gave Jake a failing grade on a major paper for plagiarism, and Tyler detention for disrupting class. Within a week, he was called to the principal's office for a meeting with Bill Henderson and the school board. 2 weeks later, he submitted his resignation." Victoria absorbed this information while continuing to watch the scene below. The Henderson brothers, she assumed, were the two tall, athletic boys who seemed to be holding court in the center of the group. Their body language spoke of confidence bordering on arrogance, and the way other students either flocked to them or avoided them entirely painted a clear picture of their social standing. "I appreciate you telling me this," Victoria said carefully. "But I found that every student deserves a fresh start. I'll judge them based on their behavior in my classroom, not on their reputation." Margaret nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the right attitude. Just ... Be aware that fair treatment might not always be appreciated by everyone involved." As the afternoon wore on, Victoria finished her classroom preparations and began reviewing her lesson plans for the following day. She had always been a thorough planner, believing that preparation was the key to successful teaching. Her first day lessons were designed to be engaging but not overwhelming, establishing routines while giving her a chance to assess her students' abilities and personalities. The final bell rang, and the school gradually emptied as students headed home or to after-school activities. Victoria remained in her classroom, making final adjustments and mentally rehearsing her introduction for the next morning. She had learned that first impressions were crucial, and education students decided within the first few minutes whether they would respect and engage with a teacher. As she packed up her bag and prepared to leave, Victoria reflected on the day's conversations. The warnings about difficult students weren't entirely surprising, but the specific focus on the Henderson brothers suggested a more complex situation than typical teenage rebellion. She made a mental note to research the family's influence in the community and to be extra careful in her interactions with them. Walking to her car, Victoria noticed the parking lot was nearly empty, except for a few vehicles belonging to teachers working late. The autumn air carried the scent of falling leaves and the distant aroma of dinner cooking in nearby homes. It was the kind of peaceful evening that reminded her why she had chosen to work in education, the opportunity to make a positive difference in young people's lives, away from the intensity and competition of her previous world. But as she drove home to her small apartment across town, Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that her peaceful teaching career was about to be tested in ways she hadn't anticipated. The warnings from her colleagues, the obvious social dynamics among the students, and the particular emphasis on the Henderson family's influence all pointed to potential challenges ahead. That evening, Victoria sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and her laptop, researching Henderson construction and the family's role in the community. What she found confirmed her colleagues' subtle warnings. Bill Henderson was indeed a powerful figure in the local business community, with contracts for major construction projects throughout the region. His company employed hundreds of people and had significant political connections at both the local and state levels. The Henderson family's influence extended beyond business. Bill Henderson served on the school board, the city council, and the board of directors for the local hospital. His wife, Patricia, was active in numerous charitable organizations and social clubs. Their sons, Jake and Tyler, were star athletes who had received scholarship offers from several universities. On the surface, the Hendersons appeared to be model citizens and a successful family contributing positively to their community. But Victoria had learned to read between the lines of such public profiles. The careful language used by her colleagues and the previous teacher's sudden departure suggested a more complex reality beneath the polished exterior. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As she prepared for bed, Victoria thought about her own hidden complexities. Her colleagues saw her as a quiet, bookish teacher who preferred literature to confrontation. They had no idea that she had spent her teenage years and early 20s in competition karate, earning her black belt at 19 and competing in national tournaments. Throughout her 20s, those years had taught her discipline, focus, and the ability to remain calm under pressure, skills that served her well in the classroom. Though in ways her students never suspected, she had retired from competitive karate at 25 after a particularly brutal tournament that left her questioning whether the physical and emotional intensity was worth the personal cost. The transition to teaching had been intentional, a conscious choice to channel her drive and discipline into something more nurturing and constructive. But the skills remained, carefully maintained through private practice and the occasional visit to a local dojo. Victoria's last thought before falling asleep was a hope that her new position at Riverside High would be as peaceful as she intended. She had no desire to return to the world of physical confrontation and competition that had defined her younger years. All she wanted was to teach literature, inspire young minds, and build a quiet, stable life. Little did she know that sometimes the past has a way of catching up with the present, especially when circumstances demand the very skills we've tried to leave behind. Victoria's first encounter with the Henderson brothers came during the third period on her second day at Riverside High. She was halfway through introducing her expectations for the semester when the classroom door swung open with unnecessary force. Two tall, broad-shouldered boys strode in without apology, their confident swagger immediately commanding attention from every student in the room. "Sorry we're late, Miss ... The taller one began, his tone suggesting he wasn't sorry at all. He had dirty blonde hair styled with expensive products and wore a Letterman jacket that looked like it had never seen actual athletic activity. "Miss Chen," Victoria replied evenly, not moving from her position at the front of the class. "And you are?" "Jake Henderson," he announced, as if the name should mean something to her. "And this is my brother Tyler." Tyler, slightly shorter but equally imposing, nodded with a smirk that suggested he found the entire situation amusing. His dark hair was cropped short, and he wore the same entitled expression as his brother. "I see," Victoria said, making a note on her attendance sheet. "Please take your seats so we can continue." The brothers exchanged a glance that Victoria caught, but chose to ignore. They had clearly expected a different reaction to their late arrival, perhaps deference, or at least acknowledgement of their special status. Instead, they found themselves being treated like any other tardy students. Jake selected a seat in the back corner, forcing another student to move by simply standing next to the occupied desk until the boy gathered his belongings and relocated. Tyler claimed a seat in the middle of the room, spinning the chair backwards and straddling it with theatrical casualness. "As I was saying," Victoria continued, her voice carrying clearly through the room, "this semester we'll be exploring American literature through the lens of social justice and personal responsibility. We'll examine how authors use their craft to challenge societal norms and inspire change." "Sounds boring," Tyler muttered, loud enough for the class to hear but quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. Victoria paused, her eyes meeting Tyler's across the room. "I'm sorry, did you have a question about the curriculum?" "Nope," Tyler replied with exaggerated innocence. "Just wondering if we're going to have to read about a bunch of dead people complaining about stuff." A few students chuckled nervously, sensing the tension but unsure how their new teacher would respond. Victoria had reached one of those crucial moments that would define the rest of her relationship with these students. "That's an interesting perspective," she said, moving closer to Tyler's desk. "Tell me, what do you think literature should be about?" Tyler wasn't prepared for the question to be turned back on him. His cocky expression faltered slightly. "I don't know. Action stuff, I guess. Things that actually matter." "And what makes something matter?" Victoria pressed, genuinely curious about his answer. "Power," Jake called out from the back. "Money, influence, real stuff that actually changes things." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "Those are certainly forces that shape our world. But I'd argue that literature is one of the most powerful tools for creating change. The authors will study this semester people like Frederick Douglass, Langston Hughes, and Sandra Cisneros. They used words to challenge systems of power and create movements that transform society." "Yeah, but that's just writing," Tyler said dismissively. "It's not like they could actually force people to do anything." "Force is one kind of power," Victoria replied. "But influence, the ability to change minds and hearts, that's a different kind of strength altogether. Sometimes the most lasting changes come not from force, but from understanding." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Victoria skillfully engaging both brothers while maintaining control of the classroom dynamic. She neither backed down from their challenges nor escalated the confrontation. Instead, she used their skepticism as a teaching opportunity, demonstrating exactly the kind of intellectual engagement she hoped to foster. By the end of the period, the Henderson brothers had participated more actively in the discussion than they had probably expected. As students filed out, Victoria noticed Jake pause at her desk. "That was different," he said, his tone less confrontational than before. "Different how?" Victoria asked, genuinely curious. "Most teachers either kiss up to us or try to put us in our place right away. You just talk." Victoria smiled. "That's my job." After Jake left, Victoria felt cautiously optimistic. Perhaps the warnings about the Henderson brothers had been exaggerated. They were certainly used to special treatment, and their sense of entitlement was obvious. but they had shown flashes of genuine intelligence and curiosity. Maybe this wouldn't be as difficult as everyone expected. That optimism lasted exactly 2 days. The trouble began during 5th period on Thursday, when Victoria was working with her advanced placement literature class. The Henderson brothers weren't in this particular class, but their influence extended throughout the school's social hierarchy. Victoria was leading a discussion about symbolism in The Great Gatsby when she noticed unusual commotion in the hallway through the small window. In her classroom door, she could see a crowd gathering. The buzz of excited voices grew louder, punctuated by occasional bursts of laughter that sounded more cruel than amused. Victoria tried to maintain focus on her lesson, but the distraction was affecting her students' attention. "Miss Chun," called out Sarah Martinez, one of her brightest students. "I think someone's getting picked on out there." Victoria moved to the door and peered through the window. In the hallway, she could see a small freshman boy backed against the lockers, his books scattered on the floor around him. Jake and Tyler Henderson stood in front of him, along with several other upperclassmen. They weren't physically touching the boy, but their body language was unmistakably threatening. "Continue reading Chapter 7, Victoria told her class. "I'll be right back." She stepped into the hallway, her teacher instincts overriding any concerns about confronting the Henderson brothers. The scene was worse than she had initially thought. The freshman, a slight boy with thick glasses and a nervous stutter, was clearly terrified. His hands shook as he tried to gather his scattered papers. "Is there a problem here?" Victoria asked, her voice cutting through the crowd's murmur. Jake turned with an expression of mild annoyance. "No problem, Miss Chun. Just having a conversation with Marcus here about his homework habits." "Yeah," Tyler added with a cruel smile. "We're just trying to help him understand the importance of academic integrity." Victoria looked at Marcus, who was pressing himself against the lockers, as if trying to disappear. "Marcus, are you all right?" The boy nodded quickly, too intimidated to speak. Victoria noticed that his shirt was torn and his lip was slightly swollen, suggesting this conversation had already escalated beyond words. "I think Marcus needs to get to class," Victoria said firmly. "And so do the rest of you." "Actually," Jake said, his tone hardening, "we're having an important discussion about cheating. Marcus here copied some homework from another student, and we're just helping him understand why that's not acceptable." Victoria's teacher instincts told her there was more to this story. "Marcus, did you copy someone's homework?" The boy shook his head frantically. No, ma'am, I just ... I helped Tommy understand a math problem, and then Tommy's homework looked suspiciously like Marcus's," Tyler interrupted. "Funny how that works." Victoria was beginning to understand the situation. Marcus, clearly a good student, had helped another student with homework. Now he was being accused of cheating when it was more likely that the other student had copied his work. "This sounds like something that should be handled by the appropriate teacher and administration," Victoria said. "Not in the hallway by students." "We're just looking out for academic standards," Jake replied with mock sincerity. "Our father always says that integrity is the foundation of education." The mention of their father wasn't accidental. Victoria recognized it as a subtle reminder of the Henderson family's influence and a warning about the consequences of interfering with their activities. "I'm sure he does," Victoria replied smoothly. "And I'm sure he'd also want his sons to demonstrate that integrity by allowing proper procedures to handle academic concerns." The Henderson brothers exchanged a glance, clearly surprised by Victoria's refusal to be intimidated. The crowd of students watching the exchange had grown larger, drawn by the rare sight of someone standing up to the school's unofficial rulers. "Of course," Jake said finally, his smile not reaching his eyes. "We're just concerned citizens of the school community." "Excellent," Victoria replied. "Then you won't mind if Marcus goes to class now." She helped Marcus gather his remaining papers and watched as he hurried away down the hallway. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed that the confrontation had ended without more drama. As the Henderson brothers walked away, Victoria heard Tyler mutter to his brother, "She's going to be a problem." Jake's response was even more ominous. "Problems can be solved." Victoria returned to her classroom, her mind racing. She had just witnessed a clear case of bullying, but the sophisticated nature of it suggested this was far from the brothers' first offense. They had crafted a plausible cover story about academic integrity while systematically intimidating a vulnerable student. The fact that other students had gathered to watch suggested this was a regular occurrence. More troubling was the realization that her intervention had likely made her a target. The Henderson brothers weren't accustomed to being challenged, and they had just been publicly contradicted by a teacher who refused to defer to their family's influence. Over the following weeks, Victoria began to notice a pattern of subtle harassment directed at students who couldn't defend themselves. The Henderson brothers were skilled at staying just within the boundaries of plausible deniability, using their social status and family connections to shield themselves from consequences. They would accidentally bump into smaller students in crowded hallways, causing them to drop their books or spill their lunch. They would spread rumors about students who stood out academically or socially, using their influence to turn others against their targets. They would monopolize school resources and spaces, claiming prior arrangements or special privileges that mysteriously couldn't be verified. Most insidiously, they had created a culture of fear where other students were afraid to report their behavior. The few who had tried to complain had found themselves facing even worse harassment, while the Henderson brothers faced no consequences due to their family's influence. Victoria documented what she observed but found limited options for addressing the situation. The administration was clearly reluctant to confront the Henderson family, and other teachers had learned to look the other way rather than risk their own positions. The situation came to a head 3 weeks after Victoria's first encounter with the brothers. She was leaving school late on a Friday afternoon, carrying a stack of essays to grade over the weekend, when she heard shouting from the parking lot near the far end of the lot. She could see a group of students gathered around what appeared to be an altercation. As she moved closer, Victoria recognized Marcus, the freshman she had helped weeks earlier. He was on the ground, his glasses broken, while Tyler Henderson stood over him laughing. "Please," Marcus was saying, his voice barely audible. "I didn't do anything. You existed," Tyler replied. "That's enough." Victoria dropped her papers and ran toward the scene. By the time she reached the group, Jake Henderson had joined his brother, and Marcus was clearly in distress. "That's enough," Victoria said firmly, stepping between Tyler and the fallen student. "Mind your own business, teacher," Tyler snapped, his usual facade of politeness completely gone. "This is my business," Victoria replied. "Marcus, are you hurt?" The boy nodded, tears streaming down his face. His shirt was torn, and Victoria could see bruises forming on his arms. "He fell," Jake said with mock concern. "Clumsy kid." "We were just trying to help him up." Victoria looked around at the other students, hoping to find witnesses willing to tell the truth. But their faces showed only fear and reluctance to get involved. "I think we should call your parents," Victoria said. "To the Henderson brothers. And the police." "I don't think that's necessary," came a new voice. Victoria turned to see Principal Roberts approaching, his expression suggesting he had been watching the situation unfold. "Actually, I think it is necessary," Victoria replied. "This student has been assaulted." Now, Principal Roberts said in a placating tone. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Boys will be boys after all. I'm sure this was just a misunderstanding." Victoria stared at the principal in disbelief. The evidence of what had happened was right in front of them, but he was clearly more concerned with avoiding a confrontation with the Henderson family than protecting a vulnerable student. "There's no misunderstanding," Victoria said quietly. This is assault, and it needs to be reported. Ms. Chun, Principal Roberts said, his tone carrying a warning. I think you may be overreacting. Perhaps we should discuss this privately in my office. Victoria realized she was witnessing the exact dynamic that had driven her predecessor to resign. The system was rigged to protect the Henderson brothers, and anyone who challenged that protection would face consequences. But as she looked at Marcus, still sitting on the ground with his broken glasses and bruised arms, Victoria made a decision that would change everything. Some battles were worth fighting, regardless of the personal cost. No, she said firmly. We're going to handle this properly, starting right now. The parking lot fell silent as everyone realized that the new English teacher had just declared war on the most powerful family in town. Victoria's defiance in the parking lot sent ripples through Riverside High that reached far beyond the school walls. Within hours of her confrontation with Principal Roberts, her phone began ringing with calls from concerned colleagues warning her about the storm she had just unleashed. Victoria, what were you thinking? Margaret Sullivan's voice crackled through the phone that evening. Bill Henderson called an emergency school board meeting for Monday morning. You're the only item on the agenda. Victoria sat in her small apartment, still processing the events of the afternoon. She had driven Marcus to the hospital herself, after Principal Roberts refused to call for medical attention. The boy had suffered a concussion, 2 cracked ribs, and extensive bruising. His parents, recent immigrants who spoke limited English, had been devastated, but too intimidated by the Henderson family's reputation to consider pressing charges. I did what any teacher should do, Victoria replied calmly. I protected a student who was being assaulted. That's not how the Hendersons see it, Margaret said. Word is, they're claiming you physically threatened their sons and made false accusations to cover up your own inappropriate behavior. Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. The family wasn't just defending their sons, they were going on the offensive, attempting to destroy her credibility before she could present her version of events. Margaret, there were witnesses. Other students saw what happened. Students who are now saying they didn't see anything unusual, Margaret replied. Sadly, the Henderson boys have a lot of influence, Victoria. And their parents have even more. After hanging up, Victoria spent the weekend researching legal options and documenting everything she had witnessed since arriving at Riverside High. She contacted the State Education Department's ethics hotline and filed a formal complaint about the administration's failure to protect students from harassment and assault. But even as she took these official steps, Victoria knew she was fighting an uphill battle. The Henderson family's influence extended throughout the local power structure, and they had decades of experience in neutralizing threats to their dominance. Monday morning arrived with an unseasonably cold October wind that seemed to mirror the hostile atmosphere Victoria encountered at school. Students who had previously greeted her warmly now avoided eye contact. Teachers who had been friendly and supportive suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere when she approached. The emergency school board meeting was scheduled for 8 o'clock in the morning, an hour before classes began. Victoria arrived early, hoping to speak with board members before the Hendersons could present their narrative. She found the conference room already occupied by Bill Henderson, his wife Patricia, and their family attorney. Bill Henderson was an imposing man in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that came from years of wielding power. His wife Patricia was elegantly dressed and perfectly composed, the picture of refined authority. Their attorney, a sharp-eyed woman in expensive suit, was already laying out documents on the conference table. Miss Chun, Bill Henderson said, as she entered, his voice carrying the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I believe we need to have a serious conversation about your future at this school. As Victoria hung up the phone, she felt a familiar sensation from her martial arts days, the moment when a difficult opponent realized they had underestimated their challenger. The Henderson family had won the first round, but the fight was far from over. The real battle was just beginning. And Victoria was no longer the isolated teacher they thought they could intimidate into submission. She was about to return to Riverside High with the backing of state authorities and a growing network of allies who had been waiting for someone brave enough to challenge the town's most powerful family. But she also knew that cornered opponents were often the most dangerous, and the Henderson family wasn't going to give up their control without a fight. The upcoming parent night event, scheduled for the following week, would provide the perfect opportunity for a final confrontation, one that would determine not just Victoria's future, but the fate of every student at Riverside High. Victoria's return to Riverside High after her 2-week suspension created an electric tension that crackled through the hallways like a live wire. Students whispered in clusters, teachers exchanged meaningful glances, and the administrative staff moved with the nervous energy of people caught in the middle of a war they didn't understand. Detective Parker had been true to his word. Victoria returned not as a defeated teacher begging for mercy, but as a protected witness in an ongoing state investigation. The immunity this provided was both empowering and terrifying. She could now act without fear of immediate retaliation. But she had also become a primary target for a family accustomed to destroying anyone who threatened their control. Her first day back brought an unexpected surprise. As she entered her classroom that Monday morning, Victoria found a small group of students waiting for her. Marcus Rodriguez sat in the front row, his broken glasses replaced with new frames, but the healing bruises still visible on his face. Beside him sat 3 other students Victoria recognized as frequent targets of the Henderson brothers' harassment. "Miss Chun," Marcus said quietly, his voice stronger than she had ever heard it, "we wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what, Marcus?" "For not giving up," replied Jenny Walsh, a quiet sophomore whose father owned a small hardware store that competed with Henderson Construction Supply business. "When you stood up to them in the parking lot, other people started talking. Students started admitting what really happened." Victoria felt a surge of emotion. These brave young people had found their voices despite years of intimidation, inspired by her refusal to back down. "We're not the only ones," added David Kim, a junior, whose older brother had been the teacher who previously challenged the Henderson family. "There are parents who want to meet with you. People who have been keeping quiet because they were afraid." The 4th student, a soft-spoken girl named Amanda Foster, placed a folder on Victoria's desk. "We've been documenting everything. Every incident, every threat, every time teachers or administrators looked the other way. Detective Parker said this could help with the investigation." Victoria opened the folder and found dozens of pages of handwritten accounts, printed emails, and even some photographs taken with cell phones. The students had created a comprehensive record of the Henderson brothers' reign of terror that went back years. "This is incredible," Victoria said, scanning through the documentation. "But are you sure you want to be involved? This could make you bigger targets." "We're already targets," Jenny replied with a bitter laugh. "The only difference is now we're fighting back." Victoria spent her lunch break reviewing the students' evidence, and what she found was far worse than even she had imagined. The Henderson brothers hadn't just engaged in occasional bullying. They had systematically terrorized anyone who didn't conform to their vision of the school's social hierarchy. David Kim's documentation revealed a particularly disturbing pattern. The brothers targeted students whose families posed any kind of economic or social competition to the Henderson empire. Jenny's father had lost several major contracts after she had briefly dated someone the brothers considered theirs. Marcus's family had faced immigration harassment after he had outperformed Tyler in a science fair. The pattern was clear. The Henderson family used their sons as enforcers to maintain not just social control at school, but economic dominance throughout the community. But the most shocking revelation came in Amanda Foster's careful notes about administrative responses to complaints. Principal Roberts hadn't just ignored the Henderson brothers' behavior, he had actively covered it up, going so far as to alter disciplinary records and pressure other teachers to change their incident reports. "We need to get this to Detective Parker immediately," Victoria told the students when they reconvened after school. "Already done," Marcus replied with a shy smile. "We met with him last weekend. He said the state attorney general's office is very interested in what we've documented." Victoria was impressed by the students' initiative and organization. They had transformed from victims into activists, using the same careful planning and documentation skills that she employed in her teaching. But their courage came with a price. Over the next few days, the Henderson brothers' retaliation was swift and vicious. Jake and Tyler couldn't directly assault the students who had come forward. Too many people were watching now, but they found other ways to make their lives miserable. Jenny Walsh's locker was vandalized with crude drawings and offensive messages. David Kim found his car tires slashed in the school parking lot. Amanda Foster was subjected to a whispering campaign that spread humiliating rumors about her family's financial struggles. Most troubling was what happened to Marcus Rodriguez. His family received anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, with voices threatening to report them to immigration authorities. His younger sister was followed home from her middle school by unknown teenagers. The message was clear: withdraw from the investigation or face consequences that extended far beyond the high school. Victoria watched these developments with growing anger. The Henderson family's tactics had evolved from simple bullying to what could only be described as organized intimidation. They were using their network of influence to systematically harass anyone who dared to challenge their authority. The situation reached a breaking point on Thursday afternoon. Victoria was conducting a parent-teacher conference with Mrs. Rodriguez about Marcus's improving grades when Principal Roberts knocked on her classroom door. "Miss Chun," he said, his voice tight with stress, "I need to speak with you privately." Victoria excused herself from the conference and stepped into the hallway. Principal Roberts looked haggard, as if he hadn't slept in days. "You need to back off," he said without preamble. "This investigation, these students, all of it. You're destroying this school and this community." "I'm protecting students who have been systematically abused," Victoria replied calmly. "You're starting a war that nobody can win," Roberts shot back. "The Henderson family built this town. They employ half the people here. If you bring them down, you bring down everyone." Victoria studied the principal's face and saw something she hadn't expected: genuine fear. "What did they threaten you with?" Roberts's composure cracked. "My wife works for Henderson Construction. My son got his college scholarship through their foundation. My mortgage is with their bank. Do you understand what you're asking me to sacrifice?" For the first time, Victoria truly grasped the scope of the Henderson family's control. They hadn't just accumulated wealth and influence. They had made themselves indispensable to the community's economic survival. Challenging them meant potentially destroying the livelihoods of countless innocent people. "What about the students they've hurt?" Victoria asked softly. "Collateral damage," Roberts replied, and immediately looked ashamed of his words. "Look, I'm not proud of how I've handled this. But I have a responsibility to protect more than just a few students. I have to think about the entire community." Victoria understood the principal's dilemma, but she couldn't accept his solution. "There has to be another way." "There is," Roberts said. "The state investigation can continue. The Henderson boys are graduating in a few months anyway. You could transfer to another district with full recommendations. Everyone gets what they need." "Except the students who will be left behind," Victoria pointed out. "New students will come. The ones who are here now will graduate and move on. The community will survive." Victoria realized she was looking at a man who had made the same moral compromises for so many years that he could no longer see alternatives. He wasn't evil, He was trapped in a system that had slowly corrupted his ability to distinguish between pragmatism and cowardice. "I can't do that," Victoria said finally. Roberts nodded sadly. "I didn't think you would. But Ms. Chun, you should know the Henderson family isn't finished. They're planning something for parent night tomorrow. Something that will end your career permanently." "What kind of something?" "I don't know the details. But Bill Henderson has been making calls all week, and there's going to be a large crowd at the event. He's told people that there's going to be a demonstration of community values that will settle this issue once and for all." As Victoria hung up the phone, she felt a familiar sensation from her martial arts days, the moment when a difficult opponent realized they had underestimated their challenger. The Henderson family had won the first round, but the fight was far from over. The real battle was just beginning, and Victoria was no longer the isolated teacher they thought they could intimidate into submission. She was about to return to Riverside High with the backing of state authorities and a growing network of allies who had been waiting for someone brave enough to challenge the town's most powerful family. But she also knew that cornered opponents were often the most dangerous, and the Henderson family wasn't going to give up their control without a fight. The upcoming parent night event, scheduled for the following week, would provide the perfect opportunity for a final confrontation, one that would determine not just Victoria's future, but the fate of every student at Riverside High. Victoria's return to Riverside High after her 2-week suspension created an electric tension that crackled through the hallways like a live wire. Students whispered in clusters, teachers exchanged meaningful glances, and the administrative staff moved with the nervous energy of people caught in the middle of a war they didn't understand. Detective Parker had been true to his word. Victoria returned not as a defeated teacher begging for mercy, but as a protected witness in an ongoing state investigation. The immunity this provided was both empowering and terrifying. She could now act without fear of immediate retaliation. But she had also become a primary target for a family accustomed to destroying anyone who threatened their control. Her first day back brought an unexpected surprise. As she entered her classroom that Monday morning, Victoria found a small group of students waiting for her. Marcus Rodriguez sat in the front row, his broken glasses replaced with new frames, but the healing bruises still visible on his face. Beside him sat 3 other students Victoria recognized as frequent targets of the Henderson brothers' harassment. "Miss Chun," Marcus said quietly, his voice stronger than she had ever heard it, "we wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what, Marcus?" "For not giving up," replied Jenny Walsh, a quiet sophomore whose father owned a small hardware store that competed with Henderson Construction Supply business. "When you stood up to them in the parking lot, other people started talking. Students started admitting what really happened." Victoria felt a surge of emotion. These brave young people had found their voices despite years of intimidation, inspired by her refusal to back down. "We're not the only ones," added David Kim, a junior, whose older brother had been the teacher who previously challenged the Henderson family. "There are parents who want to meet with you. People who have been keeping quiet because they were afraid." The 4th student, a soft-spoken girl named Amanda Foster, placed a folder on Victoria's desk. "We've been documenting everything. Every incident, every threat, every time teachers or administrators looked the other way. Detective Parker said this could help with the investigation." Victoria opened the folder and found dozens of pages of handwritten accounts, printed emails, and even some photographs taken with cell phones. The students had created a comprehensive record of the Henderson brothers' reign of terror that went back years. "This is incredible," Victoria said, scanning through the documentation. "But are you sure you want to be involved? This could make you bigger targets." "We're already targets," Jenny replied with a bitter laugh. "The only difference is now we're fighting back." Victoria spent her lunch break reviewing the students' evidence, and what she found was far worse than even she had imagined. The Henderson brothers hadn't just engaged in occasional bullying. They had systematically terrorized anyone who didn't conform to their vision of the school's social hierarchy. David Kim's documentation revealed a particularly disturbing pattern. The brothers targeted students whose families posed any kind of economic or social competition to the Henderson empire. Jenny's father had lost several major contracts after she had briefly dated someone the brothers considered theirs. Marcus's family had faced immigration harassment after he had outperformed Tyler in a science fair. The pattern was clear. The Henderson family used their sons as enforcers to maintain not just social control at school, but economic dominance throughout the community. But the most shocking revelation came in Amanda Foster's careful notes about administrative responses to complaints. Principal Roberts hadn't just ignored the Henderson brothers' behavior, he had actively covered it up, going so far as to alter disciplinary records and pressure other teachers to change their incident reports. "We need to get this to Detective Parker immediately," Victoria told the students when they reconvened after school. "Already done," Marcus replied with a shy smile. "We met with him last weekend. He said the state attorney general's office is very interested in what we've documented." Victoria was impressed by the students' initiative and organization. They had transformed from victims into activists, using the same careful planning and documentation skills that she employed in her teaching. But their courage came with a price. Over the next few days, the Henderson brothers' retaliation was swift and vicious. Jake and Tyler couldn't directly assault the students who had come forward. Too many people were watching now, but they found other ways to make their lives miserable. Jenny Walsh's locker was vandalized with crude drawings and offensive messages. David Kim found his car tires slashed in the school parking lot. Amanda Foster was subjected to a whispering campaign that spread humiliating rumors about her family's financial struggles. Most troubling was what happened to Marcus Rodriguez. His family received anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, with voices threatening to report them to immigration authorities. His younger sister was followed home from her middle school by unknown teenagers. The message was clear: withdraw from the investigation or face consequences that extended far beyond the high school. Victoria watched these developments with growing anger. The Henderson family's tactics had evolved from simple bullying to what could only be described as organized intimidation. They were using their network of influence to systematically harass anyone who dared to challenge their authority. The situation reached a breaking point on Thursday afternoon. Victoria was conducting a parent-teacher conference with Mrs. Rodriguez about Marcus's improving grades when Principal Roberts knocked on her classroom door. "Miss Chun," he said, his voice tight with stress, "I need to speak with you privately." Victoria excused herself from the conference and stepped into the hallway. Principal Roberts looked haggard, as if he hadn't slept in days. "You need to back off," he said without preamble. "This investigation, these students, all of it. You're destroying this school and this community." "I'm protecting students who have been systematically abused," Victoria replied calmly. "You're starting a war that nobody can win," Roberts shot back. "The Henderson family built this town. They employ half the people here. If you bring them down, you bring down everyone." Victoria studied the principal's face and saw something she hadn't expected: genuine fear. "What did they threaten you with?" Roberts's composure cracked. "My wife works for Henderson Construction. My son got his college scholarship through their foundation. My mortgage is with their bank. Do you understand what you're asking me to sacrifice?" For the first time, Victoria truly grasped the scope of the Henderson family's control. They hadn't just accumulated wealth and influence. They had made themselves indispensable to the community's economic survival. Challenging them meant potentially destroying the livelihoods of countless innocent people. "What about the students they've hurt?" Victoria asked softly. "Collateral damage," Roberts replied, and immediately looked ashamed of his words. "Look, I'm not proud of how I've handled this. But I have a responsibility to protect more than just a few students. I have to think about the entire community. Victoria understood the principal's dilemma, but she couldn't accept his solution. There has to be another way. There is, Robert said. The state investigation can continue. The Henderson boys are graduating in a few months anyway. You could transfer to another district with full recommendations. Everyone gets what they need. Except the students who will be left behind, Victoria pointed out. New students will come. The ones who are here now will graduate and move on. The community will survive. Victoria realized she was looking at a man who had made the same moral compromises for so many years that he could no longer see alternatives. He wasn't evil, he was trapped in a system that had slowly corrupted his ability to distinguish between pragmatism and cowardice. I can't do that, Victoria said finally. Roberts nodded sadly. I didn't think you would. But Ms. Chun, you should know the Henderson family isn't finished. They're planning something for parent night tomorrow. Something that will end your career permanently. What kind of something? I don't know the details. But Bill Henderson has been making calls all week, and there's going to be a large crowd. At the event, he's told people that there's going to be a demonstration of community values that will settle this issue once and for all. Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. Parent night was traditionally a peaceful event where families could meet teachers and discuss their children's progress. But she could imagine how the Henderson family might turn it into a public trial, designed to humiliate and destroy her. That evening, Victoria called Detective Parker to report the principal's warning. We've been expecting something like this, the detective said. The Henderson family's legal team has been very active this week. They filed motions to suppress evidence, challenged the state's jurisdiction, and submitted formal complaints about the investigation to the governor's office. Are they succeeding? Not yet. But they're putting tremendous pressure on everyone involved. My supervisors are getting calls from politicians, business leaders, and community organizations. The Henderson family has called in every favor they're owed. Victoria absorbed this information. What should I do about tomorrow night? Attend the event as planned. We'll have plainclothes officers there, and we've asked the local police to increase their presence. Just be yourself, do your job, and let us handle any problems that arise. And if they try to provoke a confrontation, stay calm and professional. Don't give them anything they can use against you. The investigation is solid, but public opinion still matters. If they can make you look unstable or aggressive, it could undermine everything we've built. After hanging up, Victoria sat in her apartment contemplating the next day's challenges. She had faced hostile opponents before, during her martial arts competitions, but this was different. Those had been contests with clear rules and neutral referees. Tomorrow night would be a battle for public opinion with no rules and referees who were already compromised. As she prepared for bed, Victoria found herself thinking about the students who had shown such courage in coming forward. Marcus, Jenny, David, and Amanda had risked everything to support her fight for justice. She couldn't let them down, no matter what the Henderson family had planned, but she also couldn't ignore the growing evidence that this conflict was affecting far more people than just the school community. If Principal Roberts was right about the Henderson family's economic influence, then her battle for student safety could have consequences that rippled throughout the entire town. Victoria had always believed that doing the right thing was worth any personal cost. But was it worth destroying the livelihoods of innocent people who had no choice but to depend on the Henderson family's business empire? These were the questions that kept her awake as she mentally prepared for what might be the most important night of her teaching career. Parent night at Riverside High was less than 24 hours away, and Victoria knew that whatever happened there would determine not just her future, but the future of every student brave enough to stand up against injustice. The Henderson family had chosen the battlefield and set the rules of engagement. All that remained was to see who would be left standing when the dust settled. Friday evening arrived with an ominous stillness that seemed to hang over Riverside High like a storm cloud waiting to break. Victoria arrived at the school an hour before the scheduled parent night event, wanting to prepare her classroom and mentally steel herself for whatever the Henderson family had planned. The parking lot was already busier than usual for such events. Victoria recognized many vehicles belonging to Henderson construction employees, local business owners, and community leaders who rarely attended school functions. Whatever Bill Henderson had orchestrated, he had clearly mobilized his entire network of influence. Inside the school, Victoria found her classroom and began arranging student work displays and progress reports for the evening's conferences. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar routine, but her mind was focused on the subtle sounds echoing through the hallways, more voices than usual, conversations that seemed to carry an undercurrent of anticipation and hostility. At 6:30, 30 minutes before the official start time, parents began filtering into the building. Victoria watched through her classroom window as families moved through the corridors, but the atmosphere felt wrong. Instead of the typical scattered groups focused on their individual children's progress, there seemed to be a coordinated movement toward the main gymnasium. A soft knock on her door interrupted her observations. Detective Parker stood in the doorway, dressed casually in jeans and a flannel shirt that made him look like any other parent attending the event. "How are you holding up?" he asked, stepping into the classroom. "Nervous," Victoria admitted. "This doesn't feel like a normal parents' night." "It's not. We've identified at least 50 people who have no children at this school, but are here tonight. The Henderson family has essentially organized a rally disguised as a school event." Victoria felt her stomach tighten. "What's the plan?" "Stay in your classroom as much as possible. Conduct your scheduled conferences normally. If anyone tries to escalate a situation, remain calm and professional. We have officers positioned throughout the building, and we're recording everything." At exactly 7 o'clock, the public address system crackled to life. Principal Roberts's voice, shaky and strained, announced that there would be a special community meeting in the gymnasium at 7:30 to address important issues affecting the safety and welfare of our students. Victoria knew this was it, the Henderson family's moment to publicly destroy her credibility and end the investigation that threatened their control. Her first scheduled conference was with the parents of one of her brightest students, Sarah Martinez. The family arrived right on time, but their usual warm demeanor was replaced by nervous tension. "Miss Chun," Mrs. Martinez said quietly, "we want you to know that we support what you're doing. Sarah told us about the students who came forward, and we think you're very brave. But we also want you to be careful," added Mr. Martinez. "There are a lot of angry people here tonight, and they're not all thinking clearly." As they discussed Sarah's academic progress, Victoria could hear the volume of voices in the hallway increasing. Groups of adults were moving purposefully toward the gymnasium, their conversations growing louder and more agitated. Her next conference was supposed to be with Marcus Rodriguez's parents, but they failed to appear. Victoria wasn't surprised. The family had already suffered enough harassment for supporting her, and they couldn't afford to risk more retaliation. At 7:25, Margaret Sullivan appeared at Victoria's door, her face pale with worry. "They're calling for all teachers to attend the meeting," she said. "It's not optional." Victoria gathered her materials and joined the stream of faculty members moving toward the gymnasium. The normally spacious hallways felt cramped and claustrophobic as hundreds of adults converged on the school's largest gathering space. The gymnasium had been transformed into an arena. Folding chairs had been arranged in rows facing a makeshift stage where Principal Roberts stood beside a microphone. On one side of the stage sat the Henderson family: Bill, Patricia, Jake, and Tyler, along with their attorney and several other well-dressed individuals Victoria didn't recognize. crowd was larger than anything Victoria had ever seen at a school event. Every seat was filled, and people stood along the walls and in the aisles. The energy in the room was electric and hostile, like a lynch mob gathering around a courthouse. Victoria found a seat near the back, hoping to remain inconspicuous, but her presence was immediately noticed. Heads turned in her direction, and she could hear her name whispered throughout the crowd. Principal Roberts stepped to the microphone, his hands visibly shaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming tonight. We're here to address some serious concerns that have been raised about the conduct of certain faculty members and their impact on our school community." The crowd murmured approvingly. Victoria realized that Roberts had been completely co-opted by the Henderson family's narrative. "I'd like to invite Mr. Bill Henderson to share his perspective on recent events," Roberts continued, stepping aside. Bill Henderson approached the microphone with the confidence of a man accustomed to commanding audiences. He was dressed impeccably, in a dark suit that emphasized his imposing presence, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had never doubted his right to be heard. "My friends and neighbors," he began, "we're facing a crisis that threatens the very foundation of our community. An outsider has come to our school and attempted to destroy the reputation of two outstanding young men who represent the best of what Riverside has to offer." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Victoria felt the hostility in the room focus on her like a spotlight. "My sons Jake and Tyler have been subjected to false accusations and harassment by a teacher who has shown herself to be unstable and vindictive," Henderson continued. "These baseless attacks have caused tremendous pain to my family and have disrupted the education of every student in this school." Victoria wanted to stand and defend herself, but Detective Parker's advice echoed in her mind. Remain calm and professional. Henderson's speech continued for nearly 10 minutes, painting Victoria as a dangerous radical who had invaded their peaceful community with the intent of causing division and chaos. He spoke eloquently about the Henderson family's contributions to the town, their employment of local residents, and their commitment to traditional values. "But this isn't just about my family," Henderson said, his voice rising with practiced emotion. "This is about protecting our children from those who would use their positions of authority to advance personal vendettas and political agendas." The crowd was with him completely now, hanging on every word. Victoria could see teachers and staff members nodding along, either convinced by his rhetoric or too intimidated to show dissent. "I call upon this school board and this community to take immediate action to remove Ms. Victoria Chun from her position and to ensure that no teacher is ever again allowed to terrorize students and families in the name of false justice." The applause was thunderous. People stood and cheered, their faces flushed with righteous anger. Victoria felt the weight of hundreds of hostile stares and realized that the Henderson family had successfully turned her into a symbol of everything the community feared and resented about outside interference. When the applause finally died down, Principal Roberts returned to the microphone. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Now, in the interest of fairness, we should allow Ms. Chun to respond to these allegations." Victoria felt her heart racing as she stood and made her way toward the front of the gymnasium. The crowd's murmur grew hostile as she approached the microphone, and she could hear scattered boos and catcalls. As she reached the stage, Jake and Tyler Henderson rose from their seats and moved to block her path. They positioned themselves directly in front of her, their faces showing the same arrogant smirk she had seen in the hallway that first day. "Excuse me," Victoria said quietly, trying to step around them. "We don't think you should be up here," Jake said loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "You've caused enough trouble already." "Yeah," Tyler added, stepping closer. "Maybe it's time for you to leave our school." Victoria felt the familiar calm that had served her in countless martial arts competitions. The crowd was watching, waiting to see how she would respond to this deliberate provocation. "I just want to speak to the community," she said, maintaining her composure. "We don't want to hear what you have to say," Jake replied, moving even closer. He was trying to intimidate her, to make her appear weak and frightened in front of the hostile crowd. Victoria attempted to step around the brothers again, but Tyler grabbed her arm roughly. "I said we don't want you here." The contact sent a surge of adrenaline through Victoria's system. In the competitive martial arts world, grabbing an opponent was an act of aggression that demanded immediate response. But this wasn't a tournament, this was a calculated attempt to provoke her into doing something that would justify the crowd's hostility. "Let go of my arm," Victoria said calmly. Instead of releasing her, Tyler tightened his grip and pulled her backwards. The action caused her to stumble, and as she tried to regain her balance, Jake stepped forward and grabbed the front of her blouse. What happened next occurred in slow motion for Victoria, though the crowd would later describe it as happening too fast to follow clearly. Jake's grip on her blouse was rough and aggressive, intended to humiliate her in front of the entire community. But his hands were clumsy with overconfidence, and instead of just grabbing the fabric, his fingers caught in the material and pulled hard. The sound of tearing fabric echoed through the suddenly quiet gymnasium as the front of Victoria's blouse ripped open, exposing her undershirt and sending buttons scattering across the stage. The crowd gasped. For a moment, everyone froze: the Henderson brothers, Principal Roberts, the audience, even Victoria herself. But then Jake laughed. It was a cruel, satisfied sound that carried clearly through the gymnasium. "Oops," he said with mock sincerity. "Guess you should have stayed home tonight." Tyler joined in the laughter, still gripping Victoria's arm. "Maybe now you'll learn to show some respect." And that's when something fundamental shifted in Victoria's mind. She had spent months tolerating harassment, weeks enduring character assassination, and an entire evening listening to lies designed to destroy her career and reputation. She had remained calm and professional through every provocation, every threat, every act of intimidation. But this was different. This was a physical assault committed in front of hundreds of witnesses, designed to humiliate and degrade her as a woman. And the laughter, the casual, entitled laughter of two young men who believed they could do anything to anyone without consequences, triggered every instinct she had spent years training and perfecting. Victoria's response was swift, precise, and devastating. Her right hand moved in a perfect shudo strike, a knife-hand chop that caught Tyler's wrist with surgical accuracy. The impact hit the exact pressure point that would cause his grip to release involuntarily while sending shock waves of pain up his arm. Tyler's laughter turned to a scream as he felt the bones in his wrist crack under the force of Victoria's strike. He released her arm and staggered backward, clutching his injured hand against his chest. Jake, shocked by his brother's sudden cry of pain, turned to see what had happened. His movement left him completely exposed to Victoria's follow-up technique. Her left hand shot forward in a precise Nukite strike, a spear hand thrust that caught Jake in the solar plexus with devastating accuracy. The impact drove the air from his lungs and sent him stumbling backward, gasping and wheezing as he struggled to breathe. But Victoria wasn't finished. Years of competitive training had taught her that in a real confrontation, you don't stop until your opponents are completely incapacitated. As Jake doubled over, trying to catch his breath, Victoria's right elbow came up in a perfectly executed high G8 strike that caught him in the ribs with bone-crushing force. The sound of cracking ribs echoed through the gymnasium like gunshots. Jake collapsed to the stage floor, his face contorted in agony as he clutched his broken ribs and fought for breath. Tyler, still reeling from the damage to his wrist, tried to rush Victoria from behind. But she had been trained to fight multiple opponents, and her peripheral vision caught his movement. Victoria pivoted smoothly on her left foot and drove her right knee upward in a powerful Haza-Jerry strike that caught Tyler in the abdomen with devastating force. The impact lifted him off his feet and sent him crashing into the folding chairs behind the stage. The entire sequence lasted less than 10 seconds. Two young men who had spent years terrorizing other students now lay on the gymnasium floor, their arrogance replaced by pain and shock. The crowd sat in stunned silence, unable to process what they had just witnessed. The mild-mannered English teacher they had come to humiliate had just dismantled two athletic young men with techniques that spoke of years of serious martial arts training. Victoria stood in the center of the stage, her torn blouse hanging open, but her posture completely composed. Her breathing was steady, her expression calm, and her hands relaxed at her sides, as if nothing unusual had happened. "Now," she said into the microphone, her voice carrying clearly through the silent gymnasium, "I'd like to address the community about the systematic bullying and harassment that has been taking place at this school." The silence stretched for another moment before Bill Henderson jumped to his feet, his face purple with rage. "She attacked my sons," he screamed. "She assaulted two students in front of the entire community." Detective Parker, who had been recording the entire incident from his position near the exit, stepped forward and showed his badge. "Actually, Mr. Henderson, what I recorded was your son physically assaulting a teacher by grabbing her and tearing her clothing." Ms. Chun's response was clearly self-defense. The detective's announcement sent shockwaves through the crowd. Parents and community members, who had come expecting to witness the destruction of Victoria's career, instead found themselves watching the Henderson family's carefully constructed narrative collapse in real time. "Both of your sons will need medical attention," Detective Parker continued, "and they'll also need legal representation. They're both being charged with assault, battery, and public intimidation. The State Attorney General's office has been building a case against your family for months, and tonight's incident was recorded by multiple law enforcement officers." As paramedics arrived to treat Jake and Tyler's injuries, Victoria finally had the opportunity to address the community. She spoke for 20 minutes about the documentation her student allies had compiled, the systematic intimidation that had been covered up by the administration, and the culture of fear that had allowed the Henderson family to control the school through violence and economic coercion. The crowd that had arrived, ready to destroy her credibility, left in confused silence, many beginning to question everything. They thought they knew about the town's most powerful family. In the weeks that followed, the state investigation expanded rapidly. The evidence provided by Victoria's student allies, combined with the recorded assault at parent night, gave prosecutors everything they needed to pursue criminal charges against both Henderson brothers and civil rights violations against the key family's business empire. Jake and Tyler Henderson never returned to Riverside High. Their college scholarships were revoked, and they faced serious criminal charges that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Their father's construction company came under federal investigation for discriminatory business practices and abuse of political influence. Principal Roberts resigned in disgrace when his role in covering up student harassment was exposed. Margaret Sullivan was promoted to interim principal and began implementing new policies to protect students from bullying and intimidation. Marcus Rodriguez's family filed a civil lawsuit against the Henderson family and won a substantial settlement that allowed them to feel secure in their community for the first time since arriving in America. Victoria remained at Riverside High, where she became something of a legend among students and teachers alike. The quiet English teacher who had hidden her martial arts background became a symbol of what was possible when someone with both the skills and the courage to fight back decided that protecting others was worth any personal cost. But perhaps most importantly, the culture of fear that had dominated the school for years was finally broken. Students who had been terrorized into silence found their voices. Teachers who had been intimidated into compliance rediscovered their professional integrity. And a community that had allowed economic power to override moral responsibility began the long process of healing and change. Victoria never spoke publicly about her martial arts background, preferring to let her actions speak for themselves. She continued teaching literature with the same passion and dedication she had always shown. But her students noticed a difference in her confidence and authority that had nothing to do with physical strength. She had proven that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't words or laws or political pressure. Sometimes it's the willingness of one person to stand up and fight back, using whatever skills they possess to protect those who can't protect themselves. The torn blouse from that parent night was never repaired. Victoria kept it in her closet as a reminder that even the most careful plans can go wrong, and that sometimes the moment when everything falls apart is actually the moment when everything finally comes together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.